lecture on, hold on one second. Okay. Hello and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and to our live stream lecture for Sunday. This is what, January 4th? 5th? 4th. Anyways, so we're very glad to have you all here today as we do our live stream lecture on a really important topic that I haven't talked about before, at least not on a live stream lecture. I've talked about it in passing in lectures and, of course, a lot on the channel and in Q&As. My live stream lecture on World War II, as you might call it, or World War III, as I call it, obviously focused a lot on this, but I'm going to be talking about, you voted here on YouTube for me to talk about the rise and fall of the Third Reich. Now, I'm not going to be able to get to everything today. It's just way too extensive, and I like the little bit of Q&A time we have at the end of the channel, of the video, of the end of the time together, of our time together on Sunday afternoons. So I'm not going to be talking about the fall so much as the rise. I'm going to focus on how the rise happened, when the rise happened, the bare minimum facts of the rise of Nazi Germany. And it's obviously a controversial topic. It shouldn't have to be, but nowadays it is for some reason, to discuss the Nazis and how terrible they were. Because in political discourses of nowadays, either the Nazis were misled or misunderstood and all of that nonsense, or everyone is a Nazi. And I don't take that perspective because I've learned history, and hopefully you have too. And if you want to learn more about history, consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as that. A good afternoon to you all, a happy new year, and I hope you are still enjoying your holiday season, although it's pretty much almost over. The 12 days of Christmas, I think, wrap up, tomorrow and then the day after. But yeah, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. This is our live stream lecture, which we do every Sunday. We vote on topics, and this is about the rise of the Third Reich. To do with the fall of the Third Reich would be basically looking at the World War. What many people call World War II, and what you might call World War III. So I'm not going to do that today. But it's good to see everybody. Please like and subscribe, all of that great stuff. I'm not feeling that well, thanks to Hars and Harry, who did an excellent job setting up the Discord. Our Discord is now live and available for everybody. So we have chats, we have discussion boards, we have forums. We're going to be doing a lot of great stuff with Discord. So please follow us on Discord. And of course, please follow us here. And I have a new microphone, by the way, and I thought it would be very appropriate for for a lecture about the 1920s, 30s, and 40s to kind of have that style. And if you could let me know if you think this is better than the microphone that I already use, I usually use, that would be fantastic. That one's kind of a modern noise canceling. This one is a retro pile or Ryle microphone, and I really, really loved it. I really liked the retro style. It really appealed to my sense of history and Throwback Thursdays, and yeah. The Discord is available for all of you. And I'm going to let you know that I've been looking forward to talking about this for a while on the channel, the topic we're going to focus on today. There might be time for Q&A at the end. But I'm not looking forward to the inevitabilities that it brings about. I think that if we really look at the Third Reich in an honest way, with an eye for political and historical accuracy, we should be absolutely disgusted with what we find. And I don't know why I have to add that quarter to something that should be so simple. I'm going to be, frankly, completely honest with you. We started this channel in February of 2024. We're coming up on our second year anniversary. I didn't think I would have to put that kind of disclaimer ever on a video that, yeah, Nazis are bad, and I think Nazis are bad. So if you don't think Nazis are bad, this is probably not the place for you. But anyways, again, and if you give me feedback about my new microphone, that would be great in the chat. But buckle up and hopefully enjoy this presentation about the history of the Third Reich, the history of the rise of Nazi Germany. And you know what? I don't like this background because I don't want people to come into the channel. The first thing they see is Hitler, and they think I'm, some sort of not neo-Nazi propagandist for the Third Reich. I absolutely despise Nazism. I think it's on the ash heap of history for a reason. but I think it's extremely important to learn about, and people want to learn about. There's a fascination in modern history with the Nazis, and it's not just because of adoration for the Nazis, which is strangely making a comeback in some quarters, but because of the need to understand. This is, I think, the cornerstone of all history: the human condition, and the human condition involves the very, very dark realities of the evils of the last World War, of not just the incredible military campaigns fought by all sides, but just the disastrous actions of the Third Reich that led to untold amounts of human suffering. So much so that the United States thought it was perfectly okay to ally with a communist dictatorship that they would then turn on in order to destroy them. So, let's see here. That background is too blurry, but anyways. Again, a very happy Sunday, happy holidays, happy New Year to everybody. Happy, happy, happy all around. Great to see everybody at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. If you enjoy history and social studies, consider liking and subscribing as I pick an appropriate background as I discuss with you the history of Nazi Germany. So, okay, that's even almost worse to use the Nazi background flag. But you know what? I'm going to let people judge when they walk in. So by the way, the swastika, the Nazi symbol, which is considered one of the most horrific symbols in all of human history, is the Nazis believed it was an ancient Indo-Aryan symbol. The Indo-Aryans, they believed, were European white people who settled those areas, and some of them also would migrate into the Middle East and into South Asia and into India. And it is true that the Indo-Aryans were a group of people that were prolific in their migrations in the Bronze and Iron Age. And eventually they would settle and create the Vedic period. They would codify Hinduism in India. And it was popular during the 19th and early 20th centuries to really embrace the connection, the Indo-Aryan natures of both the Indian people and the Iranians themselves, the Persians, as the British had been studying for quite some time. So the Nazis take an ancient Hindu symbol, but it's also an ancient Indo-Aryan symbol, and turn it upside down or turn it sideways. The original symbol meant peace and balance, and was prolific in Hinduism, and I think in Buddhism too. It was an ancient Indo-Aryan symbol, so of course it ended up in India. But of course the Nazis turned this sideways to mean chaos and disorder, which is a key cornerstone of Nazi ideology. Nazism is basically a combination of two different ideologies, actually three different ideologies. The fascism of Italy, as perpetrated by Benito Mussolini, which became popular in the early 1900s and of course came to power first in Italy in 1922. And then what else? That's the rise of fascism. And fascism mixed with social Darwinism, paternalism, or basically just racialism of discrimination against anyone who is not German, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, who is not white, particularly with a Germanic origin. So this discrimination of non-white peoples was quite common amongst the Nazis. So you combine racialism and hatred of other groups with the militaristic nature of fascism, which glorifies violence, warfare, and the ability to be in power. And basically to take all of the cultural apparatuses that you are used to and use it for the glorification of the state, for the unification of the people, under one authoritarian banner. So it is an authoritarian, anti-democratic, illiberal system that is based on race, that adds tenets of racial superiority and inferiority, the Übermensch, the Untermensch, to the political discourse and to the social, to the societal creation. So, what was I going to say? Okay, I'm just getting too much attention for the flag. This is a live stream lecture, a historical one about the Nazi regime. This is not me becoming a Nazi. This is not me being a Nazi. But being on the internet nowadays, nobody understands how discourse or a conversation works. If you want to learn more about history, like and subscribe, please. But I'm going to go back. I'm going to try to pick a symbol that is not, or a sign that is not a dog whistle to some people and a sign of condemnation for others. I'm talking about the history of the rise and the fall of the Third Reich. So let me see here. So you have nationalism on the German front. You have racism towards different groups that are considered to be inferior, and you combine it with a militaristic adoration of fascism, which basically says that all of the cultural signals, all the cultural signs and apparatuses are used by the government in an authoritarian sense to unify the people, usually around a despotic leader or political party, is was necessary for the creation of a successful government. And again, Mussolini had done this. That's not the background I want. Mussolini had clearly done this, but it was given a racial aspect and a particularly German twist with the Nazis themselves. And why does Nazism? Now? I've kind of discussed what Nazism is. You also have to combine it with a definite socialist bend that leads to authoritarianism. Now, a lot of people will point out that the Nazis were far right. I'm kind of ambiguous on that. The idea that the Nazis were indeed far right or far left is, I think, not that clear to us. And here, this is a good background for us to use. I think that's not too in your face about it. The Nazi regime, as we discussed the rise and the fall of the Third Reich here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, the Nazi regime is not the Nazi regime is not. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my train of thought. The Nazis are not a government. Oh wait, I'm sorry. They are not a definitive. They prove a definitive truth about politics throughout history, that there is a horseshoe, that the left and the right really at the end of the day is when you get to the most extreme aspects of them tend to be somewhat the same, and this has been proven historically. Mussolini and Hitler were both socialists in origin and with a lot of socialist tendencies. So the point socialism was obviously a part of it, but really more than anything is a strong will, a forceful government, authoritarianism that really at the end of the day combined with elements of socialism only in one nation, a national socialism, is similar in its authoritarian ways, in some ways, to the Soviet Union. Yes, and the flag is for educational purposes only and does not reflect the views of the channel. Thank you, Major Woody. That is the best comment of the day. And you know what? Can you rate that as a regular comment? Because I really want to pin that so that people know that I am not spewing hatred. I am not pro-Nazi. I'm not grandstanding for the Nazis. I'm explaining the history of Nazism, the rise of Nazism. I've explained the ideology. You have its origins in Italian fascism. You have influences from socialism, collectivization, and authoritarianism. You mix it with eugenics, which, by the way, eugenics movement, social Darwinism, paternalism, were all connected at this time with people believing that some races and societies and civilizations were better than others, and because because these societies, civilizations, and races were better, they had the right to do everything they could. They had the right to do everything they could to. I'm sorry, I'm blanking again. Sorry, I'm not feeling well, like I said earlier. Basically, the Nazis. You've got a combination of authoritarianism, a socialism contained in one area, social Darwinism, and the belief that different ethnic groups were inferior, different civilizations were inferior, and therefore different civilizations and ethnic groups needed to be targeted either for elimination or to be bred out by more superior forces and groups. Now, Nietzsche, the German philosopher, had written about the Übermensch, but he had never thought of it in a racial term. The Nazis took the Übermensch and many of Nietzsche's ideas about strength and will to power, which he had been writing about in the 19th century, and corrupted them in their own context and in their own ways, surrounding the idea of the best possible human beings being blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans. This ideology, so you have a racialist aspect, you have a eugenics aspect. The Nazis didn't invent this. They didn't create this out of nowhere. The idea of breeding out inferior races was shared by many intellectuals of the early 20th century, even in the progressive movement. People like Margaret Sanger and Woodrow Wilson at times seemed to believe in some form of eugenics. The Nazis were not the first to come up with any of these ideas. What the Nazis were effective at was carrying them out on a wide scale, propagandizing the population and being basically able to use mob mentality and um, mob rule and violence to control the people. And so strength, power, militarism, these are all aspects of fascism that were extremely prevalent in Mussolini's Italy and also became prevalent in Nazi Germany. 1922, the March on Rome occurs, where Mussolini is able to overthrow the Italian government at the time and basically put himself in charge. He becomes Il Duce, the leader. Dictators don't like to call themselves dictators, and Hitler will, of course, call himself a Führer. Now, let's talk a little bit about Adolf Hitler. So Hitler was the designation of him as the Austrian painter, I think, is extremely jejune. But Hitler was, of course, as of course we know a lot about his origins. He comes from Vienna. He is not, although there is and we'll return to Vienna, believing that there is a unifying factor between the Germans and the Austrians to unify them in the Anschluss in 1938, right before the war gets started. Hitler was probably heavily influenced by the mayor of Vienna and other people in the city towards anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism had been a problem in Germany since the medieval period. Martin Luther, the founder of Lutheranism, the largest church in Germany, was known for his anti-Semitic views. This is also the founder of the Protestant Reformation. Catholicism and Protestantism, the two major dominant religions in Germany, as well as the rest of Europe, had struggled with anti-Semitism for centuries. It was just part and parcel of being European to have anti-Semitic values and ideas. If you want to call them values, they're not values, but to have these prejudices was common. What happens next? Hitler is injured in the Great War, World War I, World War II, whatever you want to call it. We call it World War II here because we think the 7 Years' War was the First World War. We have a lot of information on that, by the way, which also involves the Germans. And he is injured with mustard gas. He is not killed, but he is scarred, and he is extremely disillusioned, as are many of the German people, by Germany's loss. The Central Powers falling to the Allies is kind of a huge shock. This leads to the fall of the German Empire, the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Turks. For good measure, and because it's relevant to this video and to everything else we're talking about with Nazism and the rise of the Third Reich, the Russian Empire falls and the Soviet Union replaces it. So the specter of communism is now prevenient all throughout and pervades all throughout Europe and the West, with a lot of people believing that anarchist and leftist factions will try to cause communist revolutions, and some of them do, like the Spartacist movement in Germany, which will have a short-lived revolution in 1920. The new German government is centered in the city of Weimar, so it is called the Weimar Republic, and it is Germany's first completely democratic experiment free of any sort of monarch or emperor. And this changes everything. The Prussian kingdom, the German Empire, is gone. By the way, Hitler's usage of the term the Third Reich refers to the different Reichs or lands or kingdoms of Germany. The first one had been the Holy Roman Empire, which is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but is extremely influential in the development of German culture, Habsburg aggression, and their dominance and central importance in Europe during the medieval and Renaissance and early modern periods. Then there's the Second Reich, which is, of course, the Prussian Empire, which is consolidated in 1871. Otto von Bismarck helps Kaiser Wilhelm I, and then, of course, Kaiser Wilhelm II, his son, kind of throws it all away by losing the Great War. And this is seen as a devastating loss for the German people, and therefore the need for a scapegoat for their loss in the war emerges. There are two scapegoats that the Nazis will use, and Hitler himself will fall in love with. The first one is, of course, the Jews, believing that the Jews were influential in the revolution, not just in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, but also in the Jewish bankers, money, political influence, social influence was extraordinarily prevalent in the Allies' efforts to destroy the Central Powers, will motivate the Nazis to believe that the Jews were responsible for their loss. So that's the first scapegoat that's obviously probably the one you know the most about. The second one is the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, basically forces Germany to pay war debts, which was not uncommon at the time, but also forces the Germans to accept full responsibility for the war, basically saying that the Germans were responsible for what happened, that the Germans messed this up, and without the Germans, Europe would have remained peaceful and stable. This is insulting to anyone with any sort of German national pride. The Weimar Republic accepts this, and so for many people in Germany, the Weimar Republic becomes a symbol of weakness and just giving in to whatever the West wants. The continual economic problems, including the hyperinflation that the Weimar Republic is known for in the 1920s, only continues to add to this notion amongst German nationalists and uber patriots, if you want to call them that the German government, the Weimar Republic, is weak and should be replaced with something a little bit stronger. Hitler is not the founder of a National Socialist German Workers' Party. The NSDAP exists before Hitler shows up. Now, I'm not going to butcher the German pronunciation, but it literally translates to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Deutschland usually is, Deutsch is the German language. That is what the Germans call themselves. Deutschland is Germany. So, again, Hitler, by the way, and I should mention this, which will be very important to later on, Hitler believes in the superiority of the Germanic peoples. This is not something that was uncommon in Germany. Obviously, the music of people like Richard Wagner and others was extremely important in pushing a German culture that was, in many people believe, was superior to that of the others. The Nazis will take this and identify it as the Kulturkampf, the cultural struggle within Germany and against other inferior cultures that had invaded Germany and invaded the Europeans and invaded the West and all of this sort of thing. These notions that they think are inferior, are weak. But Hitler will have an affinity for Nordic cultures, for the Austrians, because he's an Austrian, and also for the British. The British are not German, but they have the British language is German. There's much culture that is shared between the ancient England and ancient Germany. So Hitler will have an affinity for them. Of course, he will also have an affinity for the Roman Empire, believing that it is his job to bring about a new Roman Empire. And of course, we can't talk about the Nazis and only Hitler. We've been focusing on this man, this failed Austrian painter who actually, I've seen watercolors. They're not terrible. He just was told that he never really had the talent to become a great artist on his own. Hitler is also radicalized by the war, the loss of the war. And he is an uber patriot. He is very, very concerned about the plight of Germany, the weakness of the Weimar Republic, and he is willing to do what the government wants him to do, including spying on a group of National Socialists who the German government believes are a huge problem. Hitler is so entranced in his espionage of this group that he eventually ends up joining it. He gives several speeches at several of their meetings, and they are impressed by his passion and his vigor. Now, people have said that Hitler was a very, very good speaker. I have never found Hitler to be that inspirational. He always seems like he's screaming. He always seems like he's angry. And a lot of people will say, well, sure, he's German. But the real truth of the matter is, I think what Hitler taps into is a negative energy and anger amongst the German people that had been rising since their defeat in the Great War. You have the economic perils of the 1920s and hyperinflation. This is only made worse by the Great Depression. The United States in 1924, 1925 had loaned the Germans a lot of money in what was called the Dawes Plan to help them repay their war debt. Them doing that brought about the close ties between the German economy of the 1920s and the American economy of the same time. And by the way, I'm not interacting with the chat. I'm not reading the chat right now. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Welcome. A happy Sunday to you. I know you're walking in and you're popping in and you're seeing Hitler and you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is a history channel. We're doing our live stream lecture. The people of the channel voted for me to talk about this. We're talking about the rise of the Third Reich. So I am analyzing this from a historical perspective, and Nazis are bad. Now let's move on. So, and maybe some of you don't like it because I said Nazis are bad, but so what? The point in matter, and by the way, if you like the new microphone, please let me know. This is brand new. It's 40 style. I really, really love it. And yes, chat, stop freaking out. These are all people that are friendly neighborhood historians, and they know very well that I am not a Nazi, and that I am not into Nazis, and that I think Nazism is evil. But anyways, so, outside of the moral judgments, I am a historian who has to analyze things objectively and look at how things happened and why they happened the way they did. So, thank you, Harry. That's perfect. Okay. Yeah, it's a much nicer microphone in my opinion. Anyways, and by the way, for those of you who are used to me answering questions, which we do every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, there will probably be time at the end of this for me to answer some questions. So, um, uh, yes, friendly is not a Nazi. Yeah, this is a better microphone that I just got, 1940s style. It's different than the other one that I use, which is a noise cancellation one. So, the Nazis the Nazis don't have a lot of success in the 1920s. It's not going to be until the Great Depression creates an economic disturbance in Germany that radical ideologies on the far left and the far right are going to be appealed to by mainstream German politicians in order to justify their own government, which is exactly how Hitler will come to power. Now, we are struggling in the West, and we have struggled for 90 years with the question of how does this man of such evil character come to power? Because no one shows up and says, I'm evil, put me in power. People show up and say, they are evil, put me in power to stop them. And that is, in my opinion, why Hitler comes to power. That is who Hitler is. That is where the Nazis are coming from. They are we have a solution. Don't ask any questions. Here are your enemies. We are your friends. That is extremely effective, especially for a group of people that are suffering and looking for answers. Easy answers, demagoguery, authoritarianism, the idea of giving up your freedoms for a little bit of safety, like Benjamin Franklin said, that permeates Nazism. It permeates all forms of authoritarianism. And so if you want to look at the signs of how Nazism spreads and where Nazism comes from and where authoritarianism comes from, first of all, don't assume that it can't happen today, because it certainly as heck can happen today. Human nature has not changed. But also understand that my point is, also understand that it happens through people giving into demagoguery, giving into fear, and listening to the crowd, or at least not wanting to sound like they are standing out from the crowd. A lot of that is going on. Mob mentality is huge for the Nazi regime. So, like I always say, what happens next? The beer hall pushed. A lot of cities are going to make reoccurrences in the Nazi story. Munich is going to be a very important city. That's where the Nazis are based. And in 1925, the beer hall pushed is an effort by Hitler and his followers to overthrow the German government. Now, many people have compared this to January 6th, and I don't want to talk about politics too much, but it is an effort by a man who is not in power to seize power from an elected government. It is not quite the same, but it is often compared to that, and I guess, I don't know. So Hitler is arrested. He is put in prison by the German government for several years, and it is in prison that he dictates probably the most infamous piece of literature in all of human history, which translates to My Struggle, Mein Kampf. Mein is my, Kampf is struggle, Kulturkampf, all of these words. The Germans love to take a bunch of words and throw them together. And so Mein Kampf is not one word, but it is the struggle that Hitler believes that he is enduring in life, and he believes his struggle is because of the autonomy, freedom, and rights of other individuals. And he lays out in that what he thinks is the real problem of German society. And it would be trite, reductive, and just me repeating talking points to say that Hitler just blames the Jews. Hitler has a lot of other problems than just the Jews, and the Nazis themselves as an ideology have a lot more problems than just the Jews. The Jews are, in their mind, the worst example of a bunch of different problems with society. They believe that the ultra-rich are trying to hurt the poor in a very much a class-conscious Marxian idea. And they believe that the ultra-rich Jews did everything they could to ruin Germany's war efforts in the Great War. They believe Germany has lost its sense of national pride, identity, and culture. And they believe this happened because they lost the war, but also because of the influence of different cultures and influences that are non-German, that are polluting German culture, German bloodstreams, and German ethnicity. And of course, the worst group of this is the Jews. There are many Jews in Germany, and the Jews do not assimilate. This is something they are known for historically. The Jews are also, in the eyes of many German Christians, responsible for the death of Jesus, and therefore the Jews are to blame, have a theological, spiritual, and cultural difference that makes it easy for them to be scapegoated. One of the reasons that anti-Semitism doesn't start with the Nazi Party, it only continues and perhaps reaches its zenith with the Nazi Party. So that is something that is very, very palpable for Hitler and the Nazis. The idea that the Jews are the worst representation of economic inequality, the worst representation of why Germany lost the war. They are the enemies of the church, of Christianity, of the West. The Jews are the ones that brought the communist revolution to Russia. Now, this is where the left-right distinction has come along for a lot of people, and this is why I said I'm very agnostic on the idea. Now, a lot of people want to point out that Hitler was a right-winger who would vote Republican in every American election. First of all, I just don't see it. But second of all, fascists do echo many elements of far right-wing rhetoric, of belief in the family, of belief in traditional values, of unifying features of the military, of the church, of these different cultural epitaphs, or these different cultural cornerstones to be the building blocks of a strong, powerful society. And the Germans, of course, are going to add the racial element in there, where it's a German Aryan family that is so significant to the development of a successful culture. So you have hatred of Jews. You also have hatred of communists. And for the Nazis, the Jews are communists. The Jews are responsible for the communist revolution in Russia. The Jews steal wealth, and the Jews also covet wealth in the eyes of the Nazis. This is because people like Lenin and Trotsky were Jewish. The Bolsheviks, many of them were disproportionately Jewish. So because of this, communism is seen as the enemy by the Nazis, not because they hate socialism necessarily, but because in their mind, communism is a failed idea that doesn't focus on the nationhood, the nationalist front, or the patriotism and cultural signals that are necessary. Communism is basically a stupid idea that envisions an entire world revolution, and the struggle is between the struggle is between the rich and the poor, the factory owner and the factory worker, and all of these old Marxian ideas. There is a struggle. There is an us versus them. There is class consciousness. There is a class fight. There is something evil about capitalism there in the Nazi ideology and in fascism in general. But the struggle, again, is a culture kampf. It is a struggle of the culture. It is the inferior culture versus the superior culture for the Nazis. They don't mind a socialist authoritarian government with a planned economy, and they will do this under Hermann Goering, Hitler's right-hand man, who runs the 4-year plans in the mid-30s and early 40s. The way the Nazis are actually able to turn around the German economy and rapidly industrialize their military in the sense that they're ready for the war is through the efforts of Hermann Goering, and basically by ignoring all their war debts and just doing whatever they wanted to with their own money. It is a fast-track mobilization and industrialization of the German economy and military that is comparable to what Stalin had just done in Russia at the same time. There are elements and many parallels between Hitler and Stalin. These two men hate each other and actively seek to kill each other, but they actually have things in common, and we'll talk more about that later. This is probably going to have to be a two-parter just on the rise of the Third Reich, let alone on its fall. And if you want to learn more about its fall, go check out my videos on World War II, what you may call World War II, what I call World War III, where I talk about the Nazis in depth. I think I even have a video on Hitler and the Nazis. I'm trying to remember if I do. I don't think I do, actually. Now, so, where was I? And yes, follow us on Discord. We just got that starting. So the hatred of communism is not so much a hatred of planned economics and Marxian theory. They believe a misinterpretation of that. Mussolini had come to believe this, and Hitler and the Nazis will believe this as well. They also believe that people who are mentally disabled and non-Aryan Europeans are inferior and a problem for the German society. This will lead to the Nazis' persecution of Slavic peoples, Romani gypsies, people with mental and physical disabilities, and homosexuals. They believe that homosexuality is a blight upon the German people that has been propagated and perpetuated and condoned by the Weimar government, and because because the Weimar government is responsible for that. That's made things even worse. They basically see the Quisling government of the Weimar Republic to be weak and to be ineffective, and that they are the ones who will bring about German restoration and bring Germany back to its glory days. If you really want to say it, make Germany great again. Which, by the way, I just want to say has been used by all different groups of people to mean all sorts of different things, and is not necessarily a dog whistle for fascism just because one person says it, but it's true. So, and no, I'm not associated with the Aryan Brotherhood. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, which is weird for me to say with a picture of Hitler and his goons behind me. We are doing a live stream lecture like we do every Sunday. This time about the Nazis. I didn't pick it. My fans voted for it here on YouTube, and you can become a Friendly Neighborhood historian by liking or subscribing, or even a member if you'd like early access and bonus content. So, Hitler's in prison for several years. And when he gets out, he is actually hell-bent on overthrowing the government, just like he was before. However, by the time Hitler is out of jail and the Nazis are back in operation, and by the way, Mein Kampf and him being in prison and leading the beer hall push has basically led Hitler to being the clear leader of the Nazi party. There are other leaders from before that have more experience with the party. Ernst Röhm is a great example of this, but Hitler's charisma, charm, and ability to draw a crowd. Again, I don't find Hitler to be particularly charismatic, but I think Hitler has the ability to tap into negative energy in a way no one had seen before that makes him extraordinarily successful. But basically, this Hitler becomes the leader of the Nazi party not because he was the most experienced, but because he was probably the most persuasive. And we'll talk about that term. And we're talking about a bunch of other stuff related to the Nazis. By 1932, the German government is in big trouble. The economy is collapsed, and the German people have looked to both to extremes, authoritarianism, and demagogic political parties to answer their problems. And this has led them to many to embrace communism on the far left, and some to embrace the Nazis on the far right. And the Nazis are growing in their amount of power in the Reichstag, that is the German parliament. But again, Germany is a parliamentary system with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different political parties. I'm sorry I did that, but I had to, apparently. That's dead. It's a new year. Let's move on from that. But basically, the German Reichstag is comprised of all sorts of different political parties who usually will form a coalition government in order to properly run the country. And the largest political party may have a plurality, but they may not have control over the government itself. So let me put it to you this way: the way you could have imagine for a second in the United States, if the Republicans and Democrats both got 45% of the votes in Congress, but the Green Party and the Libertarians got about 5% every year. You would need a coalition government to get a majority of that. So presumably the Republicans would probably want to work with the Libertarians and the Democrats would probably want to work with the Green Party. It'd be something along the lines of that, where you put aside your other political squabbles and differences in order to form a coalition government that can run the country. Now, why is this significant? Why am I going into so much detail about this? Because this is exactly what happens with Hitler in 1932 and 1933. The Nazis gain a plurality, but they do not have the majority of the seats in the German government. And this triggers the conservatives in the German government to look closely at Hitler. Now, like many people throughout his time, the entire time of Hitler, German president and great war hero, Paul von Hindenburg, will realize too late that he has been duped. Like many people in authoritarian regimes, he will not be the first or the last. And he basically comes to the conclusion that Hitler is bad, Hitler might be dangerous, but at least Hitler is a patriot, and Hitler hates the communists, and I hate communists too, so we need the Nazis to stop the communists. So he asks Hitler to form a coalition government with the right-wing party. I think it's the Christian Democrats. I don't know if they exist back then. It's basically what the Christian Democrats would be now, the center-right party in the German Reichstag. And this party will be a bulwark against communism and be able to suppress the rise of communist ideology as Germany continues to struggle in the midst of the Great Depression. Hindenburg puts Hitler as the leader of the German political movement, of the German political system, and this gives him the title Chancellor. Now, by the way, for those of you who love Star Wars like I do, a lot of Star Wars is based on the rise of Hitler. Palpatine is supposed to be a Hitlerian-like figure who rises to power by basically mobilizing a large army, playing upon people's fears, and creating a group of people to be demonized, while manipulating everything behind the scenes, where he can basically consolidate full and total power. Yes, Star Wars is an allegory for World War II, or World War III, or whatever you want to call it at this point. By but something happens that allows the Nazis to gain more power than they had before, and that is the Reichstag. Now, I can't cover everything, by the way, so if I'm missing things, I apologize. I will talk about Nazis. I'm going to finish by talking about the Reichstag fire, Hitler's rise to becoming the Führer, the Enabling Acts, and of course, the Night of the Long Knives, and the German and the hierarchy of the Nazi Party. So, see how much I have to talk about. So, basically, another live stream lecture would have to be about the Holocaust and World War III, and of course the fall of the Third Reich. This might even be a three-parter, but basically, in 1934, the Reichstag building is set on fire, and it's supposedly blamed on a Dutch communist. Now, I have a strong feeling in my gut that Hitler had something to do with this, but it's never been proven, and the evidence actually seems to suggest that a German anarchist did, or a Dutch anarchist did indeed try to set the Reichstag building on fire. Hitler uses this as an excuse to gain more political power and to have his rule vindicated, and this leads to what are known as the Enabling Acts, which basically give the Chancellor more emergency powers. If you've watched Star Wars, you know what emergency powers means over the German Parliament, over the Reichstag. And then following that power that he's given over the Reichstag, Hindenburg dies years later, and Hitler assumes the role of both president and chancellor, and he has the Enabling Acts, which have given him full power over the administration of the appointment of cabinet positions and ministers, as well as the administration of a German government. And while the Reichstag will continue, it will basically come to be dominated by the Nazi Party, and the elections, and basically from then on out, there are no free or fair elections in Germany, with the Nazis basically suppressing anyone who is opposed to them, and you now see an authoritarian government really start to take full shape and control, and Hitler is no longer just president and chancellor, he is der Führer. The leader of a government, the one in charge. And once again, you see the militarism, you see the combination of Italian fascism with German nationalism coming to the forefront. Now, everybody was aware at this point of Hitler's views about the Jews. Many people believe that he had over-exaggerated that, and that even if you don't like Hitler, well, at least he can fix our problems, and maybe he's just kind of kidding about that whole Jew thing. Or maybe he probably won't get that done. Basically, the attitude by a lot of German people throughout the 1930s was, that's not going to happen. It's not going to go that far. Now, some German people are totally enraptured and believe this ideology completely. Some of them are kind of clapping away and saying, okay, some of it. There's definitely a spectrum of people who support the Nazis, who would be considered Nazi party members, or people who vote for the Nazi party, or people who fight in the Nazi army. It's not just all people who are just stalwart devotees nonsensically for Adolf Hitler and for the Nazi propaganda. There is a spectrum of belief and ideas and commitments to Nazism. However, I would argue from a moral and ethical standpoint that those people are only one tier below culpability than people who were chanting Sieg Heil in great numbers. Now, of course, we've seen the pictures, we've seen the arenas, we've seen them full of people, chanting Nazi slogans. This, by the way, is from the 1936 Berlin Olympics. This is the year Hitler became Man of the Year. Time magazine named him Man of the Year. Germany's economic change and revolution and reform. The 4-year plans of Goering because he's head of the Air Force. He helps create the Luftwaffe, but he also is responsible for the German interior and the German economy. His 4-year plans turn out to be extraordinarily successful in mobilizing German productivity. This leads to contracts with private companies, which is kind of the corporatism and authoritarian and planned economy that dominates Nazism and fascism and authoritarian governments that are seen to be more on the right, but still kind of have a planned economy, command economy, modus operandi like the Soviet Union did. And this, of course, is where Volkswagen is going to come in and create the people's car. You're going to have the building of the Autobahn. Volkswagen and it's not Mercedes-Benz, it's BMW will design the Nazi airplanes. So the Volkswagen, if you like Volkswagen Bugs, if you played Punch Buggy as a kid, remember, that is the Volkswagen, the people's car, designed by the Nazi regime, designed by Hitler as a way to not only promote an economic juggernaut, which Germany certainly did become in the 1930s, but also as a way to promote the idea of a people's car, of one culture, of people living together in harmony and doing German things together without the influence of evil forces like the Jews. And this will definitely be prevalent in Nazi propaganda that is disseminated throughout the time. And this is where another one of Hitler's main lieutenants steps in, a man named Joseph Goebbels. Now, Goebbels is probably the most famous of all of Hitler's various different lieutenants, and he is the one that basically spreads Nazi propaganda all throughout Germany, and it's disseminated throughout large sections of Europe, and a lot of people, like in Austria, are very open to the idea of rejoining Germany in what's called the Anschluss, which will happen in 1938, because they have imbibed German propaganda. And propaganda works in two ways. There's positive propaganda, which is our side is great, our side is beautiful, our side is patriotic. And if you don't believe that the Germans are the only ones who do this, look at Uncle Sam, because Uncle Sam is propaganda. Look at Rosie the Riveter. These are great figures in history, very important to, of course, well, they kind of are based on real people, but they kind of aren't. These are very interesting people, but they are not, but it's propaganda. Negative propaganda is the demonization of your enemy. Now, this had happened in a great amount during the Great War, but what the Nazis did, maybe better than anyone else, is to use negative propaganda, negative energy, negative speeches, negative rhetoric during peacetime in order to say, we are at war. There is a secret war going on, a cultural war, a Kulturkampf again, between us and the Jude, between us and the Jews, between us and the communists, between us and the Slavs, between us and the non-Aryans, between us and the liberals, between us, and by liberals I mean people who want democracy, freedom of speech, and things like that, and between us and, so there's a disdain for non-German people. There's a disdain for even different groups of white people they consider to be inferior. And of course, the major disdain and the major target for this disdain will be the Jewish people. And Joseph Goebbels becomes an expert in doing this, and you basically have to look at the Nazi regime, if you're going to look at it in an accurate way socially and culturally, as a society that acted from its rise in 1933 until the beginning of the war in 1939 in Europe as a nation at war. Many people have said that World War III or World War II really starts in 1933 when the Nazis come to power. Now, that's not really true, but it is interesting to notice that the Nazis are very much militarized, continually using war rhetoric. There's a reason Hitler and his people walk around in military fatigues, much like Mussolini did. It's a very fascistic principle. There is a constant conflict and struggle between different groups. This is totally taken from Marx, by the way. But reinterpreted on a national front between you and your enemies. And for the Italians, their enemies had been everybody else, so they kind of have this pit bull attitude. The Germans, the enemy is the Jews, and everyone who has supported the Jews or allowed the Jews to do what they have wanted. So there's something quite, and it is, yes, we did talk about the swastika and its Hindu origins earlier. It's an Indo-Aryan symbol that is turned upside down, meaning peace and order. It comes to mean chaos and disorder, which is, again, Nietzschean, this idea that out of chaos comes order. This is all part of a Nazi philosophy. People need to be riled up. Speeches need to be angry because people need to realize what they're up against, and we are at war. Well, I don't see any war. Everything seems to be peaceful, and things are not great, but they're better than they were when things first. No. We are at war, and we are at war. And look at all your problems in life. They are because of these people over here, and those people over there, and what happened back here. Victim mentality, the scapegoating of other people, a refusal to acknowledge the past, a refusal to care about the history that came before is huge. A lot of people think that a lot of people will buy the argument, well, the Treaty of Versailles and the Weimar Republic and the hyperinflation is what caused the Nazis to come to power. That's not true. There's some truth to it. But if you believe, as many history schools of thought will teach, that the Nazis came to power because of the Treaty of Versailles beating up the poor German people, you are buying a Nazi talking point. That is one of their talking points. That is not what the history shows. The history shows that by 1928, Germany and the Weimar Republic were stable. They had better relations with the West than they did before the war, and things were going well. Look up Gustav Stresemann. I can't talk about him a lot right now, but his reforms and efforts have put Germany on a healing path. So again, the Nazi idea that we have been at war, we have been struggling, you can blame someone else for your problems, you have problems, it's a lie. I mean, it's not a full lie, but it takes part of a truth, it highly exaggerates it, it lies about other factors, and then it uses that to justify basically building a mob mentality, whipping up a frenzy, and taking over a government. So there's a constant clash, there's a constant state of warfare. There's a constant state of violence and a readiness for violence. This leads to the remilitarization of Germany. Germany had been given quotas on how much of an army they could build following the Great War. They had also been told that they could not remilitarize the Rhineland between Germany and France. They could not occupy the Rhone. They couldn't do different areas like that, and they couldn't ever unify with Austria. They did all of those things in just a few short years because they are at war with the dictates of the past. They're at war with what the French and British empires told them to do. So in many ways, they are striking out against Versailles. This also means they will ignore the League of Nations. They will not care what the British and French international order, British and French and American created international order is saying. They will do what they think is best to achieve total political dominance and what is best for Germany and Germans only. So this is where we are on the precipice of the next World War. This is what the Nazi regime looks like. And I've already talked about a couple of the important leaders of the Nazi regime along with Adolf Hitler. I should mention Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler at first is the head of the, I'm trying to remember the term, it's SA, but of course the German marching units who, by the way, the translation of them, stormtroopers. The German foot soldier of the Nazi army was called SA, stormtroopers. Himmler comes to power and comes to precedence in the Nazi regime, and he's an extremely important figure in history because of the Night of the Long Knives, by the way, in 1934, where the Nazis had basically pruned their own ranks of anyone who Hitler believed could basically thwart, usurp, or disagree with him. This led to the murder of Ernst Röhn, who was in charge of the SA and was a much more, had been a Nazi longer, and had been a leader longer in the Nazi party than Hitler himself. So you have the Night of the Long Knives, the execution of a bunch of different Nazis who are supposed to be loyal to Hitler, but who Hitler distrusts. And now you have a new crop coming in with Goering, Goebbels, and Himmler. Himmler will eventually be put in charge of Hitler's elite special fighting brigade, the Schutzstaffel, the SS. So, and again, these are not just fun German names to say, they have a very, very precise meaning. If you look at what these words mean, they are actually supposed to give you the feel, they give you that feeling just by the tough pronunciation, Luftwaffe, Schutzstaffel. They give you this very rigid, strong feeling, just by the way you pronounce it. And that's the German language in general. But they also give, if you look at it very closely, they also give an indication of their militarism, their aggression, and their will to dominate all life. Yes, I just quoted from The Lord of the Rings. That is really what the Nazis are. And by the way, Tolkien was thinking of them when he wrote those books. But he isn't directly writing about them, but he's thinking about that. He's thinking about militarism. He's thinking about overly aggressive industrialized powers. So the... what's my point? Well, my point is you have these different leaders who emerge having different roles. You have the names based on extremely rigid militaristic terms. Himmler will be one of the most frequent advocates of solving what is called, eventually comes to be known as the Jewish question. The Nazis believed, now this is where we're going to get into trouble. Basically, the Nazis believe that the eradication of the Jewish people who they consider to be vermin, and they use plenty of negative propaganda to basically depict the Jew as a bug that has spread a cancer, a parasite that has spread all over the world and has infested the world with its ideas. They basically come to believe that the Jews are the problem in the world, and the eradication of the Jews, particularly in Europe, or at least their removal, will be the only saving way to save Europe and save Germany. And so it is not, so in the Nazi mind, they are saving Europe. They are saving the German people from the scourge of the Jew. And this could mean relocation. The Nazis at the beginning of the war actually think about sending them to Madagascar. The French say no. It eventually, execution, murder, persecution of the Jews is something the Nazis have been doing ever since they were created, and it reaches a systematic pitch. I think it's either 35 or 38 with or 36. It's right around there with the Nuremberg laws, which basically is the discriminatory laws that create a second class of citizens amongst the Jews. This eventually leads to them having to wear the stars to identify them from other people. It bans marriage with Jews. It bans business with Jews. It's basically a way to starve the Jewish societies of the Reich, so that they are trampled underfoot by the German regime. And the Germans, by the way, the Germans' relationship with the Christian church is quite interesting. Knowing the influence of Christianity and the Catholic Church, Hitler and the Nazis will make overtones to Christianity. They will reform the Lutheran Church, creating the German Christian Church to basically justify Nazi ideology. This includes rewriting sections of the New Testament to change Jesus from a first century Jewish rabbi to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy. Yes, that's not where it comes from, seeing Jesus as blonde-haired and blue-eyed, by the way. That's just other Bibles written at other times or other depictions. That has nothing to do with the Bible. But this is actually a writing, a changing of the scriptures to have Jesus in this depiction so that they can justify, they can continue to ostracize the Jews because Christ isn't a Jew, but they can also continue to elevate the German ideal, the Aryan ideal. By the way, Hitler himself was not Aryan. By the way, Hitler himself was also not Jewish. If you've ever heard that rumor, it's not true. At least I don't think it's true. Hitler was brown hair. He was a short, brown-haired, brown-eyed guy. And by the way, many Germans are that way. The Wagnerian ideal, which had been the basis for German racism, ethnic superiority, and nationalism and imperialism long before the Nazis show up, again, wasn't created by the Nazis. I don't think Hitler... Did Hitler have blue eyes? I thought he was brown-eyed. Maybe he did. And yes, the background is for educational purposes. And we're almost done with our live stream lecture. We've gone 50 minutes talking about the Nazis. We probably would have finished sooner if I hadn't been so in such a malaise when we started, but it's gone well, I think. Please like and subscribe if you haven't anymore. Yeah, I thought he was brown-eyed. I don't think Hitler was blue-eyed. He wanted blue-eyed, blonde-haired German children. The Nazis, by the way, one of the reasons the Nazis embraced traditional values, they burned books, for instance. Now, this is something that's very controversial, even today. Some of the books they burn are pro-LGBTQIA+ books. They burn works by Freud. They burn works by Marx. They burn Bibles. Nazi book burnings was to target ideologies that they believed were antithetical to German success and superiority. And they believe that the Weimar Republic embracing and affirming ultra-democratization of women. The Weimar Republic was one of the first quickly gave the women the right to vote, by the way, franchised them. But also, and there are many women who work in the Nazi Party and who are supportive of Hitler directly. And of course, you have Eva Braun, his longtime lover, who is very close to him. The whole point is that, where was I? What was I talking about? Nazis and, oh yes, the burning of books. The burning of books and materials mainly has a large amount to do with countering ideologies they think are wrong, including gay rights and homosexuality, which they will crack down on and persecute throughout the Holocaust. So there's a little bit something there. So the promotion of traditional values, the homophobic nature of a Nazi regime, which often a lot of people will conflate with them being on the right wing in modern moral politics. I'm not saying they weren't. I'm saying that part of the reason, I'm saying people conflate that is all about promoting a German family unit that is purely German, that is pure German racially, but also pure German ideologically. And of course, you have Nazi youth, you have Nazi youth camps, you have the idea of your children belong to the state, to the party, and we will indoctrinate them from a very early age in order to do everything we can to make sure that they have the right ideas and that the wrong ideas are burned and suppressed. This means the suppression of the press, the suppression of free speech. One of the reasons Freud's works are burned is not just because of his sexual ideas, but also because Freud is Jewish. So Jewish writers are targeted for destruction of their properties and ideas. So where does that put us? Oh yes, Himmler is the main one who is the architect for the final solution. And basically this idea that the Nazis, who have been killing Jews by the hundreds of thousands by this time, should basically systematize the way that they kill Jews. And this leads to the creation of the death camps, and this of course leads to the Holocaust. And the Holocaust kills about 6 million Jews. It also kills about 3 to 5 million Slavic peoples, Romani gypsies, dissidents, communists, homosexuals, and people with disabilities. So that is the way the Nazis eventually decide is to exterminate them. And Himmler is the head of this. He is the man who is bringing it about. There's also, of course, Adolf Eichmann, who serves as a lieutenant, who's very, very involved in the systematized destruction and killing of the Jews, especially. And, of course, Joseph Mengele, who serves at Auschwitz, probably the most notorious of the German camps. There are concentration camps where they basically work people. They work people to death almost. Then they kill them, or they basically keep them as prisoners as forced labor. And there's some sort of combination, and this is where a lot of the Nazi experiments with diet and with twins and with stuff like that happens. And it's Joseph Mengele who heads that up as the angel of death the fallen angel of death, if you want to say that, at Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is probably the most famous of the camps. There are also death camps like Treblinka, where they are basically just sent, killed, and then that's it. I think it's, yes, Treblinka is a death camp. So when we think of the Nazi concentration camps and we see groups of Jews and people with their heads shaved who are freed at the very end and they look like skeletons and it's awful for us to witness, yes, that's awful. And those are concentration camps. But it doesn't even sum up what the death camps were, which were basically a constant rotation of the murder of Jews and other peoples. And again, the Holocaust deserves its own live stream lecture another time. It's a much more serious topic. But in order to talk about Nazi leadership, Nazi propaganda, Nazi ideology, you can't talk about it without talking about the Shoah and what that did to the Jewish people and to all the other peoples that were heavily affected by that. So, now, I'm trying to think. Is there anything else I'd like to mention in this live stream lecture? Because we've gone about an hour, and I wasn't feeling my best, but I was able to get through most of it. Usually the live stream lectures are only like 45 minutes, but there's just so much to talk about with the Nazi regime. There's so much to talk about with Nazi ideology, and I've really only barely scratched the surface. Oh yes, one of the biggest signs of the rising tide of persecution of the Jews is the night of broken glass, or Kristallnacht, where basically in many German cities, synagogues are set on fire, businesses are burned, windows are broken. That is why you call it the night of the broken glass. And Jewish women are taken advantage of. Jewish men are killed or abused, beaten up, arrested on false charges, and it becomes very obvious that the mob mentality is being used for violence, not only the creation of a war machine, the Wehrmacht, which will soon make its name known in the world, but also for the systematized destruction of millions of lives. Now, that is, so you've got Night of the Long Knives, you have the suppression of political free speech, you have the Night of the Broken Glass, you have the Nuremberg laws, you have the seeds by the mid to late 1930s of what will become the most, probably, when we think of genocides in human history, the Holocaust is not the largest one. It is not even perhaps the most gruesome. It is not even proportionally the largest. But it is extraordinarily disturbing that in only about 5 or 6 years, the Nazis are able to kill 11 million people. And it's probably the most significant because it's the most Western genocide in human history. Many of the other genocides that people talk about occur either in the Soviet Union or in Asia or in the Middle East. When you think of genocide, unless you want to talk about the Native Americans as a potential genocide, I don't think it is, but unless you want to use that systematically and shove that square peg into a round hole, the Nazi Holocaust is the most Western genocide. And since people in the West are Westerners, they obviously will focus on that and not the history of the East like they're supposed to. Like it would be good for everyone to focus on the Holodomor, what Pol Pot did, the killing fields, the Khmer Rouge. Of course, the Turkish, what they did to the Armenians, is the first major, I think, modern genocide. And usually genocides will come with an M in the millions. Because you're looking at the systematic ethnic cleansing and destruction of large numbers of people. So, what else? Is there anything else I'd like to say? I'd like to end on a more positive note. There is no way to really do that with the Nazi regime. But what I guess I'm saying is by 1937, 1938, you really have the makings of what will be their military aggression, their irregardless, their dismissive attitude to the West, and their hatred and their suppression of free speech and liberal ideas and rights are already on the rise. And it's clear to a lot of people that not only is Germany economically and politically prosperous and successful, but they are also an authoritarian regime. If people would look at just the facts of what they could see, it is clear that they are an authoritarian, racist regime that does not believe in freedom and is building is building an army for dangerous and precarious purposes in order to spread German propaganda and ideas and power throughout the rest of Europe. that is just as evident as the economic successes. So in the Berlin Olympics of 1936, this is actually where I'll finish, and it gives us a story of hope, because this is all sad, very, very sad to hear, I'm sure. But in the Berlin Olympics of 1936, the Nazis come in with this big idea of they have revitalized the German image. And so they have all the propaganda, all of the idea of the Übermensch ready before the Nazi people and for the world to see. And this is Hitler at his apex. And many people in the West have concerns about Hitler's aggression and the authoritarian government, like I mentioned. They know some of these things. But there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the West. There's a lot of anti-Semitism throughout the world that basically will kind of semi-justify or excuse a lot of the persecutions of the Jews that are starting to ramp up. But there is also a lot of people who are very impressed, just as people in the West were stupidly impressed with Stalin for the reforms and the progress in the middle of the Great Depression when things are not stable and things cannot seem to be fixed in Britain and America. The Germans have come from way behind to come to the lead, and the Soviets have done the same thing, and they're supposed to be backwoods, deindustrialized Marxists. So what's happening here? There's a lot of cultural comp in the terms of, have we failed? Have these regimes figured it out? Have they broken? They're pretty brutal, but have they made an omelet by breaking a few eggs? What's going on here? And the Berlin Olympics is where Hitler believes he will prove to the world not only that Germany is back, which is very clearly back in terms of power. It's just as powerful by this time as it was going into the Great War, which really should have put the Europeans on alert, but didn't, because they didn't want to ever think of something like that happening again. But the Nazis also look at the issues with. They see this as their opportunity to prove that not just Germany is back, but that Germany is better, and that the German race is better. And it is actually, of all people, this man who disproves it. And sometimes the person that, and by the way, there's a lot of misinformation going around that Hitler was really impressed with Owens, Jesse Owens. This is Jesse Owens, the famous African-American runner. Hitler wouldn't shake his hand. Hitler hated him. Not just because he was black, but because he had disproven the Nazi ideology. Sometimes it takes only one person doing what they are talented and good at to prove evil things wrong. And Owens wins, I think, 5 gold medals, which is a record at the time, and just basically surprises the entire world. That at this coming out party for Hitler and the Nazis, where they have shown so much of German greatness at the Berlin Olympics of 1936, that a black man from a segregated country, America, shows up and wins 5 gold medals. It's one of the most interesting stories in history. I talk about it a lot on my series on the Olympics that I did last year, or 2024 now. But this is the first time, really, that Hitler will have someone disprove him. And the good news for all of us today is that it will not be the last. Owens is a hero. Hitler is embarrassed. But the success of the Berlin Olympics is the continual basis for Nazi justification of their regime and the evil actions that it will continue to entail from there on. So I guess the real point in the matter is that there were people, even early on, who were standing up to the Nazis, either directly or indirectly. And Owens disproved a lot of Nazi thought just by what he did at the Olympics. It would take years of war, bloodshed, and sacrifice to prove the rest of the Third Reich incorrect. All right, so that's the live stream lecture of for the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, one of our most controversial lectures, one of our longer lectures, over an hour talking about this, about the Third Reich, the rise of the Third Reich. And if I'm going to do a follow the Third Reich video, I might as well just do another video on World War II or World War III or whatever we want to call it. And of course, the Holocaust almost deserves its own live stream lecture in its own way. They're all connected. They're all, of course, very, very historically close. I'm very tired. I do not feel well. I have not felt well all day. I'm not going to use that as an excuse. I wasn't going to use that as an excuse not to do this lecture. And by the way, for anyone who's wondering, why is this young white guy talking about the Nazis? That's kind of disturbing. I talk about all types of history, and the people on my channel voted for this for the topic. I didn't pick this topic. But I'm glad that I did get to lecture on it, because I think now more than ever we need to know just who the Nazis are and just what they wanted. To think that it can't happen here. Sinclair Lewis wrote in the 1920s about the rise of a fascist regime in the United States. To think that it can't happen in the United States, it can't happen in Canada, it can't happen in Britain. We're so enlightened. We're 80 years past the Holocaust. We don't care, is terrible. And that superiority, of that intellectual, moral superiority of, oh, we won't make those mistakes. We're better. We know better. Is just as, is the, probably the mistakes of the far left in the communist governments of the 20th century. But the mistake of the far right, if you want to call the Nazis far right, is to not care about history, to not care what it teaches. The Nazis disregarded everything that Versailles could have taught them and the German people. They misinterpreted everything that the war proved to them about the inferiority of militarism and the failure of the Germans to properly continue a militaristic empire, which the Kaiser had created. But the Nazis didn't care about history. The communists believed they were better than history. The Nazis didn't care about history. Apathy is death. And antipathy is death too. So there's an antipathy and an apathy that many people, it doesn't matter what politics you have, doesn't matter what you believe about Jews or white Gentiles or anyone, there's a very, very good temptation to say, I am above history, I am better, or to say, who cares? And if we look at our world today, I don't want to get into the political situation too much. I don't even think it's the rhetoric of politics today. We clearly have that. The far left not caring, and the far left thinking it's better, the far right not caring. And I'm like, oh boy, oh Western man, have you not learned? We'll see what happens. Hopefully, we learn from history. Because if we don't, we are doomed to repeat it. And I don't think history repeats, I think it rhymes. But I agree with Hegel. We don't learn from history. Anyways, I don't mean to end on a sour note, but I hope you've had a very, very good time, that you've enjoyed learning, that you learned something you didn't. And if you did, please like and subscribe. This has been over an hour of talking about the Nazis. I don't want to talk about them as much anymore. I know there are a lot of people in the chat, oh my gosh, what's this guy doing? Oh my gosh, is he a Trumpist? Is he this? Is he that? No, I'm just the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. We're not done. I'm going to give about 15 minutes for Q&A because I want to talk about other stuff. And I want to talk about other history and other social studies that isn't about genocide and isn't saddening. But thank you, Dr. Who, What, Where. I don't know where Hars is. I don't know why he's not here. Put me over Russia in Ukraine. Sure, Theodore. I'm going to look through the chat just to see how far did we get. Where did we go today with Crazyville? Because the chat can sometimes be Crazyville. Yeah. Blue Baron, Tree. What two things are true? Let me see. And Hitler adopted eugenics ideology from the American scientists who constructed the idea in the first place. That's true. It's not just Americans, but I talked about progressivism, I talked about eugenics, I talked about Margaret Sanger, I talked about how that was present in many social Darwinist paternalist factions in the world in the early 20th century who believed that superior civilizations should outbreed inferior civilizations. And the Nazis just kind of took it and believed that everybody was inferior to the Aryans. But they were okay. They didn't want to, like, the Nazis were genocidal maniacs. They did not want to destroy the British or the French. They would have even probably been okay with Americans and the Mexicans. I don't know what Hitler thought of. Hitler obviously thought blacks were inferior to whites, but I don't know how genocidal he was in terms of Africa. There's clearly a lot of paternalism in the way the Nazis feel about Africa. They let Mussolini do what he wants in Ethiopia. So, by the way, Mussolini wasn't initially fond of Hitler because of a whole Übermensch master race. That's what they called it. So, but he got on board because he liked the aggression. Let me see. Jesse Owens there were people who treated Jesse Owens better in Germany than in the United States. Sure, you have a segregated society then the Germans weren't ostensibly segregated in 1936. Let me see. I don't know why. Someone's calling me an atheist. That's interesting. Roosevelt wouldn't shake his hand either. No. Owens was mistreated by both Hitler and Roosevelt refused to meet with him. Hitler refused to shake his hand. But they had to have him up there near Hitler because of all the press releases. And it was a huge, huge story. Um, so, let me see. What's up with the U.S. bombing Venezuela? Are we going to war soon? No. In fact, it seems like all the military action in Venezuela for now is over. Unless the Venezuelans actually decide they want to come to the United States, start a war, and get Nicolas Maduro back, which they just can't do. They just can't. Let me see. Interesting. My mom was thrown to the ground by a farm, and when the planes were flying over. So it must have been in Poland. What the original race of this planet? Well, there's only one race in that sense, the human race. Most humans probably originated from the Middle East and Africa. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, the background is not supposed to be offended. Let me see. What about the genocide of Ukraine during the Holodomor? Yes, I've talked about that many times on the channel, and I talked about it today. Basically the forced starvation of millions of Ukrainians. Why are people bringing that up now? Why is it that I can't talk about the Holocaust without someone bringing up the Holodomor? More Slavic people died in the Holocaust than Jews. That's not true. I met a Polish Jewish old man who was 14 during the invasion. He got sent to a work camp, but then joined the Red Army. He had the number but he also had Russian army knuckle tats. Interesting. Well, the Russians go into Poland just after the Germans do, and that's how World War III gets started in Europe in 1939. The ancient Aryans were all over the world. They were nomadic, so that's where the name for Iran comes from, and that's when they were in India too, the Indo-Aryans. So, anyways, let's see what recent stuff we've got. Stalin ate all the grain and forced the clouds not to rain. Good rhyme. The USA is currently planning to abduct Putin. That would be a lot harder. Will China wait out the Republican administration before absorbing Taiwan? A lot of people are saying now that the Chinese have no moral obligation to explain Taiwan if they take Taiwan because of what the United States just did. But what's interesting is the United States did this with the Chinese foreign delegation in Venezuela, knowing full well that China uses Venezuela's oil, and knowing full well that the Chinese just did a huge military excursion over Taiwan. So there's that too. I don't want to talk about geopolitics too much. I talked about this a lot yesterday. Go back and watch the Q&A. We do Q&As every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Go back and watch the Q&A from yesterday, and you can hear me talk all about this issue and about the China and Taiwan and the Venezuelans. Why didn't Japan become neutral? Wouldn't they have given them leverage and play both sides? The Great White War. They wanted land. They were just as militaristic and sympathetic to taking. They had a nationalism going on in their own way. The Nazis didn't want to show the world sites like Dachau, which existed in 1933, and religious ethnic persecution via imprisonment was already underway. That's true. History of Soviet deportations would be interesting. That's also very true. Yes, the Soviets deported a lot of people they didn't like. In fact, Stalin had turned his attention towards hating the Jews. The communists in Russia hated the Jews, and for several reasons. One, if they were religious, they were hated, but also because they believed the Jews were representative of capitalism. Funny how that works, how the Jews are always blamed no matter who is in power. The Nazis thought they were too far on the left. The communists in Russia thought that they were too far on the right. Would the Nazis be able to organize and by the way, Horse, thank you for becoming a member. I really appreciate that. You can become a member and get early access and bonus content if you would like an official friendly neighborhood historian, but liking and subscribing can become an unofficial one. You can also join us on Discord for further chats and discussions, friendly history. And yes, Stalin killed over 20 million people. No one talks about it. Yes, that's true. But Horseshoe's saying, would the Nazis be able to organize without a political party? That's how you got power. They would have otherwise just been a paramilitary terrorist group. I mean, the black shirts were kind of like that, and then you have the Nazi equivalent, which was the brown shirts, and these were just terrorist gangs. So I should have talked about those two. So the two things I didn't mention, the secret police, the Gestapo, which did what it could to abduct Jews and other people that were considered enemies of the state, of the regime, but also you have the the brown shirts, which were the early Nazi aggressors before they had the capacity to build a military and an army. And these people would basically go around and terrorize anyone who they would extort people, kidnap them, abuse women, and basically suppress any speech that was opposed to Nazi principles and ideas. They basically silenced anyone on the right or the left who would criticize Nazism. The Olympics were a propaganda coup for them. It made the German society look harmonious, but they absolutely scrubbed it for countries visiting for Olympics. Yes, it was a Potemkin village. What are pottery Neolithic cultures interested? What pre-pottery Neolithic cultures interest you, if any? I'm stoked for Karahan Tepe excavations this year. Ooh, I'm not a huge anthropological archaeologist guy, but I want to learn more about megaliths like Baalbek, Stonehenge. I want to learn where these things came from. That's to be sure. Pre-pottery. I would say the Mesopotamians, but they had pottery. Let me see. Lenin was better for USSR. Lenin killed about 5 million people. And by the way, if you want to learn how the Soviets come to power, you've learned how the Nazis came to power, you could watch my video on the Russian Revolution, which came out yesterday. Lenin suppressed and killed about 5 million people during about 6 years in power. So, but go and watch my series on Russian history, and you can learn a lot about the Russian czars, the development of the Soviet Union, and all of that stuff. Yep, it's true. Tree Gnome Villager, you know a lot. Thank you so much. It's great to have you here. Tom, but wouldn't neutrality prevent the attack on Pearl Harbor, which was caused by the embargo from the U.S.? They could have negotiated with the U.S. and have them not interfere in Asian geopolitical affairs. They thought they were in the right to attack the U.S., and they thought they had won. But Yamamoto said, we have awoken a sleeping giant. I think that they felt they were just as cocky as Hitler was when he invaded the Soviet Union. How did the Soviets come up with such a great tank as the T-34? Did the Allies somehow assist them? No, German ingenuity. Germany has always had this is what makes Germany so fascinating to me as a historian, is the geopolitical significance of Germany. The Treaty of Versailles and then the dividing of Germany between East and West by the Allies and the Soviets at the end of the war is huge because what it does is it sends a very clear message that Germany is dangerous if it's unfettered. And keeping Germany down was the policy of the second half of the 20th century. The Germans have resources, ingenuity, and are extremely methodical and were very good at building. And by the way, the 4-year plans of military contracting in order to build up the private sector that Goering used were used by FDR at the beginning of the war. So FDR, despite obviously being anti-Nazi, wasn't as anti-Nazi as you think, at least in the sense of he would use their skills and ideas, and he flirted with tons of discrimination and persecution of people. He just didn't kill millions of them. So, did you believe he had the spear? Oh, this is the spear of destiny. The Nazis many of them were obsessed with with occult rituals. The spear of destiny is supposedly the spear that struck Christ and killed when he died on the cross, in the New Testament. They might have, I don't know. This is obviously shown in Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones, the first and third movies, is all about the Nazis being obsessed with religious imagery and iconography and hagiography in order to gain special power or at least justify themselves as the uber race that found these things. And it's true, the Nazis were interested in finding religious relics and using them. Let me see. I want to learn more about the Tamil kingdom, but no one knows. I'm not a huge expert in the Tamil kingdom, but I can talk about other Indian kingdoms. That's obviously in South India, or is that in Ceylon, Sri Lanka? Let me see here. Let me see. But yeah, the T-34 was amazing. German ingenuity and creativity was fantastic during the war and before, and had been in the 19th century. Germans were first in space when tested their missiles went to space. That's true. Werner von Braun creates the V-2 rocket. Soviets eventually became self-sufficient with this by the end of the war, largely, though the Soviet USSR continues to rely on some Western tech products, just as the USA needed things like titanium. True. Jaden is saying, why are there so many evolution deniers in the 21st century, but 20th century they believed in evolution but misrepresented it like eugenics? Social Darwinism is not Darwinism. This is not, the Nazis were not Darwinists through and through. They used Darwinian principles to apply them in a civilizational context. And this had been used by people like, is it Edmund Spencer? I think it's Edmund Spencer, the guy who coined the term. or Howard Spencer, who coined the term, survival of the fittest. Those people had, they believed, they took the Darwinian principles and applied it and said this should justify colonization by the British and the French and the German empires, and was also a way of taking the social principle and applying it pseudo-scientifically to psychology, civilization, and anthropology, and history. It's a bastardization, basically, is what I'm saying. Sending a missile into space counts as Germans being first people in space? It doesn't. Thoughts on Operation Paperclip and Overcast. They are the respective ways in which the Americans and Soviets after the war brought Nazi scientists back to help them research. They were horrified by what they saw, but interested in how the Nazis had been so productive, so creative, and also had developed so much technology so quickly. Indeed, Einstein goes to Roosevelt and tells him to do the Manhattan Project because he says that the Germans are working on a super weapon. The Germans might have very well gotten the A-bomb if they had not kicked out all the great Jews who could have provided them the science to do it. I'm sorry, it's just so funny to me. You hate them, you kick them out of your country, and then you don't have the technology that they could have provided you to beat your enemies. It's really, really fascinating. Many Jews did leave Germany who had means to do so, and Einstein is a great example of that. No, I didn't talk about it earlier. It's at the end of the war. Basically, scientists are taken by the Americans and the Soviets and used to help build their space program and prepare the weapons that become the weapons of the Cold War, the military arsenals and so on. The Japanese internment camps weren't as horrific as mainstream portray it to be. Children were granted education and adults were taught trade skills to assimilate to the working society. It's true, but they weren't able to leave. It's not a concentration camp. No, it is not. I'm saying that FDR doesn't have a clean human rights record. Let me see. You cannot have the dimensions of my skull. If you are referring to the fact that social Darwinists and different anthropologists did that in the 19th century during that time period to prove a point, then thank you. How does an object into space mean the people who sent it were the first to space? The first to send something into space. It's like saying Vostok was the first thing in space. If you want to see the Discord, it's in YouTube post, but Hars, if you could put it in the chat, that would be great. Let me see here. And yeah, there is the Discord. And I will use that. I will place the pinned message. Eugenics was huge for the Nazis. Why do we compare verified resumes for McDonald's yet have no organized competitive resume process for political candidates? Because it's more open-ended, and it's more because the same way that Hitler can rise to power with no political experience, taunting a message, and conversely, George Washington can be the best, maybe the best American president with no political experience. Leaders have always been a more dubious thing, and picking leaders is a modern concept. And to be fair, picking food workers is a modern concept too. But the basic reason is we feel the need to politicians appeal to what they think we want. Fast food workers are appealing to what we want in the sense of making fast food, but they don't. But if you don't order a burger, they don't lose their job. But if you don't vote for them, they don't get their job. It's different. Today's topic just about things pertaining to World War II, what I would call World War III, but no Belisarius. And it's great to see you, by the way. Longtime friendly neighborhood historians like Belisarius and Tanya make this channel go around. And of course, I got my great moderators, Hars and Harry, who worked really hard on setting up the Discord. So please join it. I'd be really happy to have you there, and you can talk, and we go into more discourse about a bunch of different things. We're actually preparing to do a debate on the War of 1812 and other debates and stuff. So Discord is going to be a huge blessing to us this year. And the goal is we are monetized, but to make this channel the channel. The only work that I'm doing this year would be fantastic, so I can dedicate a lot of my time to history. So check out all the shorts that come out every day and the long form videos. I've got multiple ones of those that just came out yesterday, and another one coming tomorrow. Usually they're Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. But sorry, Belisarius, it is, but it's mainly about the rise of the Nazis. It's the rise of the Third Reich, not the fall, to quote William Schreier's book. Einstein, Adler, and Oppenheimer all fled Germany, Nazis, and made it to USA. Oppenheimer was not there. You're thinking of Niels Bohr. Simon Bolivar tried to make another U.S. into Colombia, but federalism didn't work. He was far more dictatorial than Washington was, and was far more about making himself the center of power. Let me see. Yes, and all the best to you as well, Belisarius. How can a political candidate appeal to what we want if we collectively are never asked? People are asked, and that's where demagoguery comes from. People think that the job of the politician is to give them things. So That's a problem. So Harse and Harry, two of my main moderators did a great job. But M. Caffo, I really appreciate your help today with batting the channel down when I was trying to just wake up, basically, or just feel better and keep people, reminding them that this isn't a Nazi channel. This isn't Nazi propaganda. This is a historian talking about history. Do you think the British do Hess dirty, imprisoning him for life when he went over to dialogue with them? Rudolf Hess kind of acted on his own, but Hitler kind of sanctioned it to go to Britain. He was captured in Scotland, and basically say, we should talk our problems out. This is the beginning of the war. It's an interesting story. Hess was imprisoned because he was a Nazi, and imprisoning Nazis was the thing to do. That's why you have Spandau Prison after the war, and Nuremberg. You are not timed out, Tor. Why were you timed out? I'm sorry that you were. I don't know about Ballesteros. I don't know that Hess would have gotten anywhere. It just seems too far out of kilter for anything to go anywhere. And by the way, for those of you who usually join us, give me a little feedback on my feedback. Do you guys prefer this microphone, this new 1940s style one, and the sound it makes, or the old one? I tested out a couple of videos and they sounded a lot better. Oh, Elavu's here. Great to see you. Tell us of the great King Baldwin of Jerusalem. So now we're getting away from the Nazis. Okay, good. This is the live stream lecture on the Nazis, so that's what we were talking about. Baldwin of Jerusalem was, actually there's four of them. Baldwin IV is the one you're probably referring to. He dies about 25. He's king for about 10 years. And he supposedly had holy armor on that prevented him from spreading leprosy. He had leprosy. He was badly deformed by it. It kept him from having children and made him die young. But he was actually able to beat Saladin, the great Egyptian general, on multiple occasions while wearing this armor and this plating. And I've done videos on him. I've done an entire series on the Crusades. But he basically kept the kingdom of Jerusalem, the Crusader kingdom in Israel, alive until his death. And then after that, Saladin kind of ran them over. He's a fascinating guy. Who were the Italians waging war against in the Second World War? And why were they the more inferior compared to the Germans and the Japanese? I would argue that there are three potential start dates for World War II or World War III. 1935, 1937, 1939. 1931 is the tradition. 1939 is the traditional one. 1937 is Marco Polo, when the Japanese attack the Chinese at the Marco Polo Bridge, or they do a false flag where the Chinese attack them, and that justifies their entrance into the conflicts. You also have 1935, when Italy attacks Ethiopia and overthrows Haile Selassie, who goes to the League of Nations and complains about it, rightfully so, and becomes a hero for not just the Ethiopians, but for the Rastafari religion. That is where Haile Selassie comes into history. And he's a fascinating guy, by the way. But basically, the Italians were overpowered when it came to the British, and were mincemeat for the Americans. And the Germans kept feeling like they had to bail them out in northern Italy and central Italy, and also several times in Africa in the African campaign. They had successfully taken over areas in Dalmatia, as well as, of course, Albania. And Mussolini was trying to rebuild the Roman Empire by taking over large segments of the Balkans. He probably wanted Greece, but he wasn't effective enough in seizing that land. So Hitler is actually the one that goes into Greece. And basically, the Italian army, the Italians do not have the resources, productivity, or manpower that the Germans do. And they are not as good. They do not have the generals like Rommel. They are not good at blitzkrieging, and so they are able to win several different conflicts throughout the war, but it's usually with the help of the Germans. And they are clearly inferior. It's that meme of the two snakes that are threatening and the one that's silly. It's clearly the case for the Italians during the war. And the Italians, by the time the Americans attack Sicily and Italy in 1943, the Italians, their hearts are in it. They're more than willing to surrender. And by the way, they're fighting their cousins, because Italian Americans are fighting on the shores of Sicily and up the Italian boot. So there you go. Didn't Hitler have one testicle? I've heard that before. I think that's true. He wasn't able to have children. He doesn't marry Eva Braun until right before they kill themselves. So, greetings from Ethiopia. Hey, we talked about Ethiopia, and Double X is here. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you liked hearing about Haile Selassie. I mean, I like talking about him. Let me see. Who else? But great question, Tom, as always. You always ask such good questions. Now that I've outed myself as an S-poster, I now have no need to S-post here, and I will be coming just to say hello now. Well, I'm glad that you I understand that. I've had many trolls come onto this channel and they're like, I wanted to troll you so bad. And and then they're like, you know what? You're actually kind of cool. And I'm like, good, because I troll back. So if you want to S-post, there's places to S-post. The Discord is a good place to S-post, but don't S-post here. And yes, I'm going to say S-post because I like to keep it classy here. During World War II, my family were put into a camp on island off the coast of New Zealand because we were German. Yes, there wasn't that much in the United States, but the British are very concerned about the Germans. And the Germans were attacked, persecuted, but not as much as the Italians, and certainly not as much as the Japanese in the Western world. And yeah. Yeah, Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935. Yes, that's true. That's what I was just talking about. Haile Selassie goes to the League of Nations, condemns the attack, brings the attention that's necessary, is restored to power by the Americans, and becomes friends with Churchill. Just an amazing guy. Can you explain what the relationship between the British and the Germans were that led to the Hessians liking the British crown? I know it was due to Protestants. This is part of the connection between the British and the Germans historically that made Hitler a little softer towards the British Empire. He's impressed with their military strength. By the way, the Nazis are always impressed with military strength. That's why they like Mussolini. That's why Hitler looks up to Mussolini. But he's impressed with the British Navy. He's impressed with British history and their military dominance in the 19th and 20th centuries. But he is also... he has an affinity for the Brits. There are many Germans that are Anglophiles. They have a lot of shared culture, especially ancient and in medieval. But the early medievals, particularly. The Hessians were German allies of the Hanoverians. Hanover was a duchy in Germany where George was brought as a distant cousin of Queen Anne because he was the closest Protestant relative to become the King of England at her death in 1714. And by that time it was Britain, so he's the King of England, Scotland, and Wales. So the Hessians serve in the American Revolution, fighting with the Brits against the Americans because of their close connection to the Hanoverian Georgian royal family. What's up, Tasty? What about those Nazi scientists at the end of the war? Brought Operation Paperclip, and I forget the name of the Soviet one, brought to the United States and the Soviet Union to help build up their military arsenals for the Cold War. Well documented. But they should know post-war history, and I'm glad that I do, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you acknowledge that I do, then like and subscribe. Can you give a quick, short summary of why the Prussians used to be such a powerhouse militarily before Napoleon was around? The Prussians basically created the standard for military drilling techniques of 18th century warfare, and the Prussians were made a military powerhouse. Napoleon just made every military powerhouse around him look weak in comparison, except maybe the British. But the Russians, the Prussians, the Austrians, almost the Ottomans, almost everyone that Napoleon ran into was a military powerhouse. He was just so overpowered. And Hars, if you could put the video link to Napoleon's life, that would be good. But the Prussians had created the standard for military drilling techniques where basically you march in a straight line towards your enemy, you stop in an open field, you fire on them, and you fire until their line breaks, and then you charge in with bayonets and stab them. This was used in the American Revolution. This was used in the Napoleonic Wars. This was used in many wars, although Napoleon kind of changes strategies, starts using trenches, starts modernizing a little bit, and he's able to outsmart them, like at Austerlitz. But yeah, it is pretty incredible how good the Prussians were at what they did. After World War II and Germany was being demilitarized, why was Krupp industry not demilitarized? I don't know enough about it to speak to it. Are you a royalist in the UK content? Do I think the monarchy is good for the UK? I think historically and culturally, yes. Yes, tasty goodie. Vive le roi? Yes, long live the king. Would Germany have reached more success if they were able to infiltrate Latin America through soft power, since a plethora of countries were trading and inviting Nazi propaganda despite U.S. discontent? Yes, they could have done a kind of a new Zimmerman telegram, a new Zimmerman plan in the Third World War to correct their folly in the Second. Can you explain how I'm a jingoist in your opinion and how I interpret facts? This is what we were talking about on the Discord, Hars, but a jingoism, and this is important to talk about in any historical context, is somebody who is overly patriotic and kind of only reads the history, especially of their own country, through the lens of what their country did right and what other countries did wrong. It's good to be patriotic. It's good, especially if you're going to study history. Patriotism is a gateway to history. Wanting to learn about your country because you care about it is something that will lead you to learn about its history, and that's a perfectly fine thing to do. We need that in some way, but we don't need. But when we do history, when we study history, and anyone who comes to this channel, anyone who takes any interest in history is a historian. You need to be reasonable. You need to be accountable with the facts that you learn about. You also need to not look at history as a tool to make a weapon with to prove that your country is better than this or that. Would you say Napoleon was the greatest commander in humanity? Is the title worth saying? Yes, I don't think Alexander is better than Napoleon. I think Napoleon won on larger fronts at larger scale than Alexander did, which also meant he fell hard. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Wolf and Montcalm. You're gonna have to jog my memory. I don't know what those are. Because maybe I do, I just don't know them by that name. Because there's different weapon strategies, societies, everything in different periods, and you don't know how they would have performed in others. That's fair, but I do think that Napoleon beats Alexander. Okay, so how am I a jingoist? You have the America is usually right. America needs to be defended. I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud of American history. Therefore, I'm going to interpret American history this way. That is hard to separate yourself from because I'm a proud American too, but you have to. It's if you want to be depending on how deep you want to go, how serious you want to get into the field of history, because there's the casual pop field of history, which we're doing, and then there's the technical field of history, the science. Would you say Napoleon was poisoned or died of stomach cancer? Probably stomach cancer. There would be no reason to poison him. Metternich had already gotten everything he had wanted 6 years before. So if they had poisoned him, it would have been at Elba. I have videos explaining the Crusades. I even have a compilation long-form video on the Crusades. The Battle of Quebec and the British leaving the French out of Canada. Oh yeah, 7 years war, French-Indian War. It's another theater of what I consider to be the First World War, where basically the British are able to use their naval advantages sailing upriver to kind of thwart the Canadians and the French, which is a huge surprise. A lot of people did not expect the British to win. They start at a huge disadvantage. Most of the Indians are allied with the Brits or with the French, but the use of the Iroquois, the rivers, their navy as always, and their American allies make it easier for them to go in and take over, areas of Canada. Yes, thank you, Illumi. I appreciate that. Who do you think was a better commander, Hannibal or Alexander? I'd take Alexander over Hannibal, but I love Hannibal. Hannibal's fascinating to me. Why is Stalin not looked at as bad as Hitler, even though he was in charge during the Holodomor? Great question, Seswan. And I guess I'll finish with this because it ties back to the live stream lecture, and it ties back to the importance of free speech, which is why we're free speech absolutists here, and you can basically say whatever you want as long as you're not distracting the channel. At the end of the day, oh, you're very welcome, Belisarius. I don't know a huge amount about it, but I tried to give you as much as I could. But at the end of the day, with Stalin and Hitler and with all of these guys, and I guess I'll just go back to the Hitler background just because of the importance of what we're talking about here. And no, I am not a Nazi. I'm not advocating Nazism. This is what I was talking about today. I think it was a really, really good live stream. I hope you enjoy your cheese casserole. But I think it's really important to study. And there's just so much there that I'm thinking of now that I can't even speak, that I couldn't even speak to, and I did an entire hour on it. Stalin I think that I did a video on YouTube about 6 months ago, and I said, it was a hot take video, and I do these where there's just a quick opinion. I don't really explain it, but I can if I need to. Where I said that Stalin is worse than Hitler. The video was taken down and banned. Or no, that wasn't it. The video was put on watch that I was maybe saying something good about the Nazis. I've had that happen to me on TikTok and on YouTube. I made a video where I said Hitler would have let the British go if the British had simply surrendered to him. And that video was banned. And even on appeal, I didn't get it approved, which I know a group of people that banned content they didn't like. They're right there. That should probably sum it up. We are extraordinarily sensitive about the Nazis. And the way, this is just a psychological way I think humans work, but I think it happens in history. The Nazis are really bad, and we don't want to ever underestimate how bad they are. So we need to make everyone else that's bad look, we don't talk about them the way we should because the Nazis are so bad. Because if we ever say anyone's worse than the Nazis, then we made the Nazis somehow less bad. No. Hitler was not as bad as Stalin. It's not close. Or sorry, it is close. I would understand why someone would say that Hitler was worse, but Stalin is worse than Hitler. And there is nothing wrong with saying that or believing that. And what Hitler did in targeting ethnicities and trying to systematically destroy not classes but races of people stands out to a world that is still reeling from anti-Semitism and is still worried about racism. Stalin did not target people specifically for race, although he did hate the Jews. He targeted people based off of the class distinctions that Marxism called for doctrinally and their orthodoxy. And he got very, very close to liquidating them. In many ways, he did liquidate the kulak middle class, peasant class. So Stalin is not as bad as Hitler, but they're both just absolutely horrid. Or sorry, Hitler is not as bad as Stalin, but they're both absolutely horrid. So we should have more attention on what Stalin did with the Holodomor. We should. We can talk about both. And somebody can be worse than Hitler, and Hitler can still be the most disgusting thing we think of other than that. Nazism can still be wrong. Hot take, but yes, Nazism can still be wrong. And Nazism can still be wrong, and Stalin can still be worse than Hitler. So yeah, Nazis can be evil, Hitler can be horrid, and Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao can be worse, because they were. Remigration is a Nazi idea, deportation is a Nazi idea. No. The Nazis believed in deporting. They wanted to deport the Jews to Madagascar, but no. But Hitler was addicted to meth. That's true. The methamphetamines, the uses of drugs by the Third Reich, it's crazy stuff that they did. Is Mao worse than Stalin? Probably. Yeah. Well, we got a lot of people, but I think it's the new mic. I think the internet's working fine. We didn't have any interruptions there that kind of hurt the algorithm. I think we were in good shape today. I really do like this new mic. But anyways, and people are more focused on the West, and the Soviet Union wasn't quite seen as the West. It was seen as very foreign and non-Western, and I think that's another reason why we don't focus enough on the Holodomor and what Stalin did. But it's absolutely worth learning about. And if you want to follow that, watch my videos on Russian history and see how the Russian Revolution happened in my most recent video on that. I'm gonna clear out. Belisarius, thank you for joining us. Everybody else, Emir, really appreciate that. Please like and subscribe if you haven't. Become a friendly neighborhood historian. Join us on the Discord and all of our other social media. Hearts, can you put the other social media in the chat? I'll stay on for a couple of minutes so that he can do that. Yes, they had child brothels. Yes, they had horrible things in Germany before the Nazis came. And they had horrible things after the Nazis left. And they had, you know what was really horrible? The Holocaust. There you go. When you get a whiskey smoker in chat, you should use the new mic for the vibe. Oh yeah. I could do that. I mean, I have, you know very well, because you know me personally, that I have that. I just don't smoke in the studio usually. I do for members only lives if you want to become a member, but yeah. Hars, can you put the social media in the chat? Because we're officially over. I'm not answering questions anymore. But yes. So that way they can follow us on Patreon, Substack. They can read my articles there, or on TikTok, where we have plenty of other, stuff available. What colorations do you see? Oh, there they are. And so you can follow us on Discord or on those social medias. Take a screenshot and copy and paste. What colorations do you see? And I'm answering his question because he's a member. Do you see between the Nazi Party and Putin's party today? Militarism, patriotism, but I see Putin as a paper tiger, not having a tenth of Hitler's strength. Hitler never would have struggled with the Ukrainians the way that Putin has struggled with them, even with the West helping them. You know why? Because the West was helping the Soviets, and he still got really close to knocking them out. And thank you for the gift membership. Really appreciate it. Okay, thank you, Hars. I really appreciate you doing that. Show some love to my moderators. They do such a great job. I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for joining us. Those of you who didn't get your questions asked today, come back. Like, for instance, Siswan asked about the Holocaust numbers, which I do believe are true. And Ken Cook was asking a couple of things, and I think they're relatively new. So come back, join us. We have our live stream Q&As Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, so we'll be back then. And, of course, our live stream lecture for next week you can vote on 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Take care. Thank you for subbing. Have a great evening and a great week ahead of you. Happy New Year to you all. And, as always, love history. Bye-bye now.